goaltending is the easy thing to point to, and Gilio and I have talked about this, and I don't think anybody is out here trying to tell you, but no, goaltending is actually good. We all recognize it for what it is, and it's different without Freddie Andersen, and we don't know when Freddie Andersen's going to come back. And hopefully, the most important part is he gets the blood clotting issue right. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
But beyond the goaltending issue, I think it is masking other problems for the Carolina Hurricanes. And yes, we can all recognize that defensively they have not been what that roster should be. But I keep coming back to the offense. I keep coming back to a system that can create a bunch but isn't cashing. And at some point, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again. And Joe and I were talking about like the likes of Sebastian Aho. Are you the guy? Are you this guy that is going to produce what the contract dictates? And I'm starting to wonder, maybe he is the guy, but they're so devoted to the system that it's handcuffing an offense that might be better than it actually is.
Yeah, I don't think so. You may be right. I don't think so. And the reason why is, by any metric, there are 25 teams in the league that would trade for the Hurricanes' balance of chances for and chances against over the course of the season. The finishing is a perpetual issue. And that's why Andrei Svechnikov gets all the big money, because he's supposed to finish in a way that other players can't. And he's finishing like Victor Rask right now. So, you've got to get past, I'm not blaming everything on Andrei Svechnikov. I mean, Michael Bunting was supposed to score more. You had Jesperi Kotkaniemi carry the offense through the first month of the season. You shouldn't lose a game when that's happening. But I do think that is a very, very multi-season macro problem that the additions of Bunting and, to a lesser extent, Brendan Lemieux were designed to address. Let's get some guys in here who can finish some of the chances we create. That hasn't changed. And I don't think at this point, unless you're going to change coaches, you can get away from that, because the team is wired to play a certain way. It has to play a certain way to have success. And the idea is, over a period of time, if you take enough kicks at the can, you won't run into a Florida situation where you get outscored in 4 1-goal games. You'll win 4 1-goal games and win the Stanley Cup. So I don't necessarily have an issue with that. That's the way the team is built. We know it. It makes up for it in other ways, supposedly. Everything else that you mentioned, the defense, the turnovers in the neutral zone, the losing guys, to me, that is all the game poisoned by lack of confidence in the goalies. We saw it with Scott Darling. We saw it with Eddie Lack. We saw it to a certain extent at times with Peter Mrazek, but times with Freddie Andersen. When the players on the ice lose faith and they don't believe in the guy in the net anymore, they start taking shortcuts, which is the worst thing you should do. But you're like, oh, crap, I've got to go do this because we can't give up that chance. That's where, when you play the way the Hurricanes play, all the seams open up. Suddenly you're getting sliced apart. Things fall apart. And I think that's a big part of what's going on with the defense, is those guys aren't doing their jobs because they think they have to do everything, because they know that any shot, I mean, God bless Peter Kochetkov. I think he still could be the goalie of the future, but he's doing this Scott Darling tribute act where he's either making himself small or falling over or waving at stuff with his glove. We've seen it before. We know what happens to the game on the ice. And as much as things have been exponentially better under Rod Brind'Amour, there's some tenets from the Bill Peters system that carry through there. It's not a complete break from coach to coach. So when we say that we've seen this before, we have, to a degree, that mentality of when your goalie is not good. And look, you cannot paper over the goaltending situation. Even if the Hurricanes were playing perfectly from goal line to goal line, they would still be losing games because of the goaltending situation. They are of the 4 worst goalies in the NHL. So of, let's say, 60, 70 guys who have played 10 to 15 games. Of the 4 worst goalies in the NHL, they are 2 of them. You cannot win hockey games that way. Because 1, you're going to lose games because of the goaltending when you play well. 2, they're not going to win a game for you when you play crappy. And 3, eventually it starts bleeding over to the rest of your game. And that's what we're seeing now. That's the snowball. That's the cliff you fall off of. It's hard to come back from that without getting a new guy in net or Freddie Andersen coming back, which I agree. Freddie Andersen's deal is long-term because you cannot get that wrong, right? You dial it too far one way, he gets a clot on a plane. You dial it too far the other way, he bleeds out on the ice from a skate nick. It has to be right. Once you get into that, you're playing with forces you cannot understand. So I feel like in the end, yes, you're right that there's guys who aren't producing, there's guys who aren't scoring. To me, that's just sort of who the Hurricanes are, and they usually overcome it, except for that one playoff series a year when they don't, and the odds are with them that eventually that won't happen. The goaltending stuff bleeding into their defense, allegedly the deepest defense in the league, and I think it's been better since Chatfield replaced D'Angelo. That's the cue for all the power play folks. But I think it's been better until this latest slide. I think that's poisoned by the goaltending. So I do think the Hurricanes' specific problems tie back to goaltending. The failing to finish chances is just sort of something. It's a absolute, like the firmness of the earth with this team.
We are correct in criticizing Jim Phillips for all of the reasons that we criticize him for. His leadership model is one way. Tom Dundon is on the other end of that spectrum. Mm-hmm. So the one thing that always blew me away to this day about Tom Dundon was him telling me, oh, that's not how, in a real Dean Smith type moment, that's not how we calculate the Stanley Cup odds. And I'm going, this guy's doing something else that I ain't even fucking thought of. Yeah. Like, I mean, holy shit, dude. So if Joe Giglio's at PNC Arena watching the Islanders game, Luke, and I think I saw you at that one, that's the one. You watch that game, you are dominant. You are playing. You're doing all the things. I mean, it was like the Book of Rod or the Book of Laviolette or whoever Laviolette. Yeah. Oh, yeah. From. Like that was how you draw up how the Hurricanes are supposed to play a hockey game, and they lose.
Yeah.
Because of the goalie.
Mm-hmm. And you could point to like, well, they didn't defend well enough on this player. He lost his man in this play. Kochetkov did not make one save you need him to make.
So if I'm sitting here looking at that going, and you're sitting there going.
And that was the game for me where it ticked.
Yeah. So what's Tom doing, Luke, do you think? Because I keep joking, well, they'll just go trade for Patrick Roy or Marty Brodeur. But they have to be evaluating all of the different options that are available to them at this point, right?
Yeah, well, we know they are because they brought in Jaro Halak on a tryout, which is not the kind of thing you do if you're feeling good about your goaltending. And obviously he was not at age 41, whatever he is, not up to snuff in the practices they saw. So that was that. I think it's two things. One, they're trying to wait as long as possible. The longer they wait, the more cap space they're going to have at the deadline to address other problems. So yes, tactically in the sort of now, and I think it's reached this point, you're trying to just say, look, if we can just cobble together enough decent games, which I think even at the time of the Islanders game, they were, to stay afloat until January 15th, February 1st, then we can go out and get a goalie from a team that's contending now and has fallen off the map a little bit. Like maybe that's the Islanders. The other part of it is, and then so you're preserving cap space. Two, what's the market look like? Is someone like Marc-Andre Fleury using up a big chunk of your cap space any better than these guys now? I mean, statistically, it's a very marginal improvement. Now, could you put Marc-Andre Fleury on a new team behind these guys and they plays better? Maybe. Goalies are weird. We've seen that a lot. But you look at the problems that the Wild had, the problem the Oilers had. It doesn't matter how well you play when your goaltending is that bad. And that's gotten both those coaches fired. Obviously, this is a different situation because it's Rod's a different guy, but this is the kind of thing that in other markets with other coaches leads to a coaching change because there's only so much you can do other than that shock to the system to get a team going. I don't think that will happen here. I would never rule it out. It's hockey. You know, coaches are disposable parts, but he's too big a part of the identity of the franchise to do sort of a mid-season panic fire.
Look, Rod, of all people, understands that he's not going to have this job forever, and it's going to end in a way that he probably doesn't want. So that's just the nature of the business. He's done this too long and knows better. And I want to make it clear, I'm not advocating that, hey man, you know, if Rod doesn't get this thing turned around,
no,
you got to like, my push simply is the Canes' frustration for me is I get your point about the odds. They feel when we talk to Dundon in the gas station, when they feel that the odds are in their favor, all right, it's very Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Got it.
The playoff series with Florida. He said, play that thing 1,000 times. We win 999.
But you don't get that. You don't get that.
No, I know.
That's sport. You don't keep getting those opportunities.
But if that's your math brain, that's how
no, the NHL committee said the Hurricanes were one of the two best teams and put them in the final against the Oilers.
That's what it was.
Because they had to, because those are the rules. And
those are the rules, man.
Possibly do the. Anyway, I'm sorry.
They're sixth in the Metro or whatever, not because it's because the committee feels they're the sixth best team. Anyway,
I think the Oilers loss, though, of the most recent performances is the one that you say you can't play like that.
No,
the Winnipeg, Calgary, Vancouver are all games where you're like, this is what the Canes do. And you're going to win some of them and you're going to lose some of them.
Here's the Winnipeg game is a great example. Laurent Brossoit won that game for the Jets.
Yeah.
They were outplayed, and their goalie won that game for the Jets. Honestly, when's the last time you said the Hurricanes played poorly and their goalie bailed them out?
Yeah.
I went back to last January looking for a game that you would say that maybe won in the playoffs. But it just doesn't happen because they don't play that poorly that often. And B, their goaltending hasn't been good enough to bail them out. It's been good enough to win when they play well. And now it's not good enough to win when they play well. And in fact, costing them wins when they play well.
There's a larger conversation to be had. I want to see more data. Just good coaches, and I think Rod is a good coach, eventually will look at the things happening to like, why does this keep happening? Why does this keep happening? Well, maybe you need to change the way you go about it. And I do wonder if there's a wrinkle. I mean, look, he hung out with Mike Krzyzewski. Did Mike Krzyzewski win 5 national championships because he kept doing the same damn thing over and over and over again? No. He saw how things were evolving. He saw how things were changing. I have to get entire classes out of here because this isn't working anymore. So I am curious at what point for Rod in his coaching arc looks at what's going on and feels, all right, I need to make some changes, because there's also the dynamic of the window and their players and how long they're going to be here, looking a little older too. That's another aspect of this that is part of the Kane season so far. Guys looking a little bit older. So these are just big macro questions that I think are fair conversations to have about the Carolina Hurricanes while it's still relatively early in the season.
Luke, your thoughts on either Orlov coming in and not fitting in, and or every year I feel like we have a conversation about a player who's in a contract year, and then invariably they come back and they're like, yeah, man, I just didn't play the same because of the contract. I wonder where that is with Pesce and what we've seen from Pesce this year, because the defense and I think you're right when you ultimately say you're trying to do too much because of the lack of ability in net. But I do wonder, Orlov being that new piece and Pesce in the contract situation that he's in, do you see anything different with those two guys?
The thing I see with Orlov is the thing you see with every defenseman who comes into the system, which is it takes you 4 months to figure it out. It took Brent Burns 4 months to figure it out. It took Dougie Hamilton 4 months to figure it out. Doesn't matter how good you are. The way the Hurricanes play, the way they handle the defensive zone is different than the way a lot of teams play. And it works for them. It wouldn't necessarily work other places. So when you are a defenseman who's played all or most of your career one way, you come into the system, you're asked to make different reads and take different guys and do different things around the net. That's not uncommon. And look, you're going to have a hard time finding two guys with more hockey sense than Dougie Hamilton and Brent Burns. And they both struggled with it. Now they're both fine by February. So to me, that's kind of the window for Orlov. The Pesce thing, this is a guy who's had a lot of injuries. There's a lot of hard miles there. At a certain point, that does catch up with you. And I think that's been a part, even before this season, of the Hurricanes' reticence to sort of sit down and say, like they have with other players, like they did with David Terravino 3 summers ago, whenever it was, all right, let's just sit down and do what it takes to get this done. We've seen them do it. Like there is a point in their management process where they say, okay, we're willing to give a little bit because we want to get the deal done, as much as they try to, crunch every number, et cetera, et cetera. They haven't done that with Pesce. They haven't done that with Brady Shea, which surprises me a little bit. That may be sort of a insurance plan if things go wrong with Pesce or something. And obviously Teuvo Teravainen, you're kind of like, well, go ahead, kid, do what you can do, and we'll figure this one out at the end of the year, based on the way he played last year. So Teuvo plays better in contract years. Marty Necas clearly does not. That probably, I think if you're going to do one thing here, aside from the goaltending, what this group may need, to your point, Joe, and more than anything else, it's not necessarily changing the system, but have things gotten stale? Did running it back put too many guys in positions they're too comfortable in? And is this the time to trade a popular player, if you get something back, to send a message to everyone else there? That's what Jimmy Rutherford would do right now.
Yeah.
He would pick a guy at random, trade him to the Stars, and just deal with it. So is now the time to make a Marty Necas trade? I would argue that the way he's played defensively in some of these games, he's not helping you. He may still have some value because his numbers are okay and his overtime stats look great. But is now the time to make a deal like that? Do you trade Teravainen? I wouldn't trade Teravainen now because his value is low and he's still contributing. But this is the time to think about something like that. And I just think the market for Pesce and Shea has not been what the Hurricanes thought it would be, or one of them would be gone by now.